Perfect. Thank you, Gary. Good evening, everyone. So we were looking at the sugya of Shechita, and this shiur will be a little bit of a whirlwind tour through the rest of the sugya. I think we left the last shiur posing the question: what is the machlokas Rav and Shmuel? Why is it that Rav thinks there's the melacha of tzeveya and Shmuel thinks there isn't? So we're going to use this as a chance to visit countless topics that are hot topics in the sugya of tzeveya, and this is just a chance to really understand and explore the melacha of tzeveya. So what's the machlokas Rav and Shmuel? Why is it that Rav thinks there is tzeveya and Shmuel thinks that there isn't tzeveya? That's one question on the sugya. And a second question on the sugya is, what is Rav embarrassed about? Rav says that future Duras might laugh at my opinion that there's tzeveya here, and therefore you need to explain that no, there's tzeveya here because you want to demonstrate to people that it's fresh. What's exactly the chiddush in that, and what did Shmuel disagree in that, and what was Rav so embarrassed about? Why did he think people would laugh? So let's take the first topic. What's the machlokas Rav and Shmuel? So I printed in the sheets some of these sources, but I'm not going to them inside. I'm just going to go through them really very fast. And all of these are topics the halacha. The Nishmas Adam speaks about the issue of tzeveya that's not miskayim, and he suggests over here the issue is that this tzeveya is not miskayim, it's not permanent. Now, factually speaking, it may well be permanent, meaning it may be a tzeveya that lasts a long time. Nonetheless, the dyer has no interest in the tzeveya lasting a long time. He just wants it to be there to show the client that the meat is fresh, and beyond that has no particular interest in it lasting. So is this called a temporary tzeveya, in which case it wouldn't be a melacha, min haTorah or not? We know there's a concept of a melacha that's miskayemes, or melacha she'eino miskayemes. Is it called a melacha she'eino miskayemes if it will last a long time, but you have no interest in the whole thing lasting a long time? This is a practical halachic discussion around, at the moment, for example, around corona tests. So when you use a corona test on Shabbos, a small patch of coloration occurs on the test, which is severe. But you have no interest in anything beyond seeing the tzeva there for a moment. And then as far as you're concerned, the tzeva could disappear. And indeed, you chuck away the test. So is that called a disposable, a temporary tzeva, melacha she'eino miskayemes or not? Now, chemically and factually, the dyeing lasts. It's a melacha miskayemes. In terms of my interest, and indeed the whole permanence of the object upon which the dye is placed, it's eino miskayemes. Because as soon as I looked at the test, I will discard it. This is a shiur around coronavirus at the time, and it's something also that is often asked by people who, for whatever reason, need to take ovulation tests and the like, various sort of dipstick type tests, where an indicator gets discolored. It's a permanent discoloration on the one hand. On the other hand, you have no interest in keeping the artifact. Is this called tzeveya that's miskayemes or not? And the poskim, this is one of the maramakomas in that sugya, in that topic of what's called melacha miskayemes or not. So that's one understanding of what the machlokas is.
Could you say one understanding is it's they're arguing over davar she'eino mitkaven, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon?
Well, not at least in the answer of Rav, because Rav answers that it is miskaven. In other words, there are two questions on the sugya. One is, what was Rav's question? Why did he think you wouldn't be chayiv? And the other one is in his answer, why are you not chayiv? So in terms of why he thought you might not be chayiv before he understood that people do it, or before he explained that people do it to show the freshness of the meat, davar she'eino miskaven would be a very tenable explanation. But once he explains that people wish to dye it in order to show the freshness, why would Shmuel argue on that explanation? Why would Shmuel hold there's no tzveya? So it's not davar she'eino miskaven. He wants the discoloration to occur. He wants fresh.
But he just follows Rabbi Shimon, who says that davar she'eino mitkaven is mutter.
Correct. But in the answer of Rav explains it's not a davar she'eino miskaven. Rav explains it is mitkaven because you want the discoloration to occur to show people it's fresh. You're talking, there's two stages to the sugya. One is Rav's havamina. Why did he think people would challenge his pasak? And your answer of Dova She'enim mitkaven is a good answer. And then there's a second stage in the sugya in which Rav explains that people want this to happen because they want the meat discolored to show it's fresh. Once people want it to happen, why on earth would Shmuel argue with that? So Dova She'enim mitkaven wouldn't be a good answer. It is mitkaven because you want people, they want the blood to dye the flesh to show people it's fresh. So what would Shmuel's critique on that be?
So
one suggestion would be that Shmuel's critique is because you have no interest in a permanent discoloration, you just want it as an indicator, much like an indicator on a medical test nowadays.
So base Shechita doesn't mean the place in the sense of the location where you did the shechting. It definitely means the area around the knife wound.
So it would appear.
Okay.
Sorry, this might be a bit of a stupid question. I'll ask it anyway. What if it's mint kayem? If the stain is mint kayem, then how does it show that it's fresh?
It would appear that people can see the fresh, literally the fresh blood.
So then I'm not interested in the staining per se. I'm interested in fresh blood.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But fresh blood is a different color to dried. It's a brighter scarlet when it's fresh.
Right. You're probably right. So probably they're looking at the staining, but they're seeing the freshness of the stain. Sorry, I didn't look up. I didn't see who said that comment because I was looking down at my Gemara.
It was me, Josh.
So you were saying that it's a different color, or?
No, that was Edward. I was asking.
You asked the question, I saw that. So Edward was going to answer. Yeah, I think that's probably right. That's a better answer than I gave you. Right. If it's the blood itself, then that wouldn't be tzev at all. So it'd be the fresh coloured discoloration. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So this is one possible answer. That you have no interest in the permanence of the stain. Another answer that's given is that sevea is when you want something to be coloured, such that you're not interested in the color, in the dye itself, you're interested in the change in coloration of the object that is dyed. Now, let me explain what I mean. If you write letters on a piece of paper, or you draw a picture on a piece of paper, you're not chayav for tzevea, you're chayav for kosev. Why? Because the discoloration, the recoloration that occurs, is not in order to color the background, but in order that the color itself should be there. The color itself forms an image or a shape, which, for example, in the case of drawing a picture or writing letters, carries communication. And that's the melachot of kosev, of lichtov, to write, of ketiva, rather than the melachot of sevea. Why is it not also sevea? Because sevea is when you want the coloration to immerse itself in the background. The background becomes recolored. The background is colored. You don't want the color for itself. You want the object that is colored to be colored. Over here, you want the color itself, not the object to be colored, and therefore maybe this wouldn't be the melacha of sevea. It'd be a bit equivalent to maybe someone, I don't know, wants to look at a sample of paint. So you dip a little piece of paper into the paint to give them a sample of the paint. You're not interested in the paper being colored, you're interested in carrying the paint. So this is a second suggestion.
So can't it be kotev then?
Sorry?
So would it be kotev then?
No, because there's no symbol here. Kosev is only when there's some form of symbol. So you slip between the gaps, and it would be neither
you need two of them,
nor the melacha of tzevea.
You need two characters for kosev.
If it's letters, you need two characters. There could be other cases where even one character can carry enough communication. For example, a picture or an image.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it needs to carry within it the information itself, as opposed to a blob of paint where it's just the color that carries the information. It's not it doesn't carry within it. It has no information-bearing content.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is a second suggestion that's given that you don't want the coloration of the object. You want just you just want the color itself. A third suggestion, which also is a hot topic in Melachos Sevea, is whether yesh sevea ba'ochlim or ein sevea ba'ochlim. Is the concept of sevea relevant with food? And there are achronim that suggest that since here it's food, it's meat that's being discolored, or coloured, the concept of ein severe ba'ochlim wouldn't apply. There's a lot of discussion in the place whether one has to be concerned with the melachot severe when you colour food. So, for example, I don't know, you make some ribena, so you take some water and then you pour in it ribena, where you've effectively recoloured the water. And actually, you like the colour change that occurs to the water. It looks nice, ruby red, instead of just being plain water. When you make tea and coffee, this is something that's discussed by the poskim. Is this a concern or not? Now, normally speaking, we don't think much about it because most of the time we are reducing colour, not adding colour. By that I mean that you normally put, let's say, the ribena essence in the cup, and then you add the water to it. So you are diluting the colour of the ribena rather than colouring the water. If you have the water in first and then you add the ribena, you're colouring the water. If you've got the ribena first and you're adding the water, you're lessening the intensity of the colour of the ribena. So the post can discuss, is this something one needs to be conscious of or not? And the general view is that ein severe ba'ochlim, and therefore you don't need to be conscious about the melachot of severe ba'ochlim, even though there is a mokum l'chachmir, those who wish to be stringent can be stringent, it's a reasonable chumrah to take on. It's not core halacha, we don't have to be worried about severe ba'ochlim, unless you are deliberately working on affecting a colour change. So if you're mixing in food dye because you wish to decorate the food and make it green in order to make it look minty, and you care about the colour, or you want to decorate a kid's birthday cake, then there would be severe ba'ochlim, but in general, achila not. So the place can discuss whether Al Gemara, maybe what's going on in Al Gemara is the issue of severe ba'ochlim. It would also get to, I can't remember again who asked it. Someone asked, what is it that you're actually dyeing over here? Is it actual base Shechita or not? It would come down to that question also. Are you dyeing the skin of the animal, or are you dyeing the flesh of the animal? What exactly is being coloured here, and whether what's being coloured is an ochel or not? So I just mentioned this as three very, very rich halachic discussions that develop out of our sugya about what's going on and why in the maskana of the Gemara, Rav thinks that there is tzaveh and Shmuel thinks that there is no tzaveh. But let's move on to another question over here, which is what was Rav's havamina? Why did he think there was a problem here at all? He said, I don't want future generations to laugh at me. In other words, I'm concerned that they will say this is ridiculous. How can Rav say you're chayiv for dyeing the meat? Obviously you're not chayiv. And Rav therefore had to answer this question by saying, no, you are chayiv because you want the coloration to occur in order to prove that the meat is fresh. What was Rav concerned with? Why did Rav think it should be potter? So one very good answer to the question, and this is Adam's answer to the question, and this is said indeed, the Minchas Chinuch, I think, cites this as a possible answer. So about Davai She'enu Miskavi. If you had no interest in the dyeing occurring, then it would be a Davar She'enu Miskavi, it would be an unintended side consequence. And this is a good answer to the question. It would be an unintended side consequence, and that's really what's going on over here. The problem with this answer is that if that's why Rav thought he should be potter, and he said they're going to laugh at me because it's a Davar She'enu Miskavi, surely this is a machlokas tanoim, as we saw in the previous sugya. It's machlokas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. So why would he worry that they were going to argue with him and laugh at his pasak because it's a Davar She'enu Miskavi? All they would say is, obviously Rav holds Davar She'enu Miskavi is chayiv. And in fact, there's some evidence that that is Rav's view from other sugyas in Shas. So it's tenable to explain that you could, if we didn't know about wanting the color in order to prove it's fresh, you could exempt from this coloration because it's Davar She'enu Miskavi, except that it's difficult to see why Rav was self-conscious about being laughed at as a result of this. So people would just say Rav holds Davar She'enu Miskavi is chayiv. So that's a one attempt as an answer. And it looks to be a little bit like that may be what Rashi is saying. Because Rashi says, Milsad Omri Dover Tema Amati. I said something strange. This is the first narrow lines on Ein Hayom base. I have to explain myself. I don't want other people to laugh at me. So what's his answer? What's he want? It's HaShochet, this is the laugh. Etc. And Rashi seems to say that the issue going on over here is that there's kavanah in the melachot or not. So one could learn that as pshat in the Gemara, but it's difficult because all the future Doris would have said is evidently Rav holds Davar She'enu Miskavi is chayiv. So this is an attempt at the Gemara. And as I said, Lashon Rashi is much more a bit like that, because Rashi in the top Rashi says, Mishum Tzeveya, he says, and I'm coming for you, later on the Gemara explains where his kavanah is to be Tzeveya. So Rashi introduces into the Sukkah the words Mechavin kavanah, and therefore maybe what's bothering Rav is that it's a Dover Shein Miskavin, except as we said, why would future generations laugh at that? It's a perfectly reasonable stance to adopt.
Can I ask a question? So I don't know if I'm missing something. Could we not just explain that this is a Dover Shein Miskavin? It's psik ratio that there's going to be some discoloration, and it's just a question of whether it's nichole or low nichole. And Rav was a bit tentative to explain this as a nichole because he thought future generations might not see this as a nichole type thing.
It's also a reasonable explanation. The problem is that if Rav would have just said, I want to explain my Pesach, because you want the food colored, the neck to get dyed, and that's why it's nichole, or that's why it's not a Dover Shein Miskavin, that would have been great. But Rav doesn't say that. He says, what I've said sounds ridiculous until I explain myself. Rav's tentative concern about nichole, lo nichole, Dover Shein Miskavin, inna miskavin, yes miskavin, is not a reason for future generations to laugh, because there are reputable opinions that hold that Dover Shein Miskavin is chayiv. So machlokas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. The reputable opinions that hold Dover Shein Miskavin psik ratio is chayiv. So why is Rav
I don't think
about his statement that it's going to lead to mockery in future times?
I don't think he'd be self-conscious about that machlokas, but he might be self-conscious about his discerning it to be nichole or not. Like personally, if I saw meat in the butcher covered in blood, that would not be nichole to me. So he might have been conscious about that determination of it being nichole.
The problem is there is a Tana who holds that you don't need nichole. There's a Tana that holds you don't need miskavin at all. Dover Shein Miskavin is chayiv. Not if it's psik ratio. Kal v'chomer if it's a psik ratio. So the truth is you're edging to another answer. Maybe what's going on is not Dover Shein Miskavin. There's melachot shein tzricha l'gufa, which is how Tosfos understands lo nichole. Maybe it's a melachot shein tzricha l'gufa if you have no interest in it being dyed, and that's why Rav is saying, people will laugh at me and say, why should you be chayiv? Because it's a melachot shein tzricha l'gufa. The problem is we have the same question again. There's a machlokas tanaim whether you're chayiv for melachot shein tzricha l'gufa. So all Rav would lead future doers to say is, evidently Rav paskins that melachot shein tzricha l'gufa is chayiv. And again, there is some evidence that indeed is how Rav paskins from other sukkahs. I'm not going to go into it. So this explanation also seems to fall by the wayside. Minchas Chinuch raises this possibility, and he says maybe the reason Rav says they'll laugh at me is because if I have no interest in the skin being discolored, is a Dover Shein Miskavin. Dover Shein Miskavin is a melachot shein tzricha l'gufa, and therefore you should be exempt. But again, melachot shein tzricha l'gufa is a machlokas tanoim. Why would people laugh at them? Again, let me just step back just to make this point crystal clear. There is plenty of room for halachic discussion about whether you would be chayav for dyeing the neck with the blood or not, until you hear Rav's chiddush that people want the neck covered with blood. But till you hear that chiddush, there are good reasons to say you would be potter. Maybe it's Dover Shein Miskavin, maybe it's a melachot shein tzricha l'gufa. The problem is that Rav didn't say, I'm now going to explain to you why it's chayav. It's because you want the neck discolored. He said, future generations will laugh at me. In other words, my Pesach looks ridiculous. It looks like a chucha, like a joke, as Rashi says. Why does it look like a joke? There are serious halachic opinions who hold that melachot shein tzricha l'gufa chayav, Dover Shein Miskavin is chayav. So even without Rav's chiddush that you want it discolored, there would be serious views in our Masorah to hold your chayav. So why will future generations laugh at this Pesach? If one wants to strengthen the question, there's some evidence that Rav is actually of the opinion that you'd be chayav for Dover Shein Miskavin and you'd be chayav for melachot shein tzricha l'gufa. So neither of these explanations seem to work. I saw in one of the Likut Svarim a third explanation in the name of based on a principle of the Chazon Ish. We know that there is a melacha called makalkel. A concept called makalkel. When I do a melacha which isn't positive but is negative, it's destructive. That's not a melacha. Every melacha has to be a creative act. That's the definition of a melacha. If it's a destructive act, even though I want to do it, it's not a melacha. The Chazon Ish suggests that even irrelevance is enough to stop it being a melacha. A melacha has to be a creative act. An act which has no significance whatsoever to it is not a melacha. A melacha has to be a creative act, achieving something. If it achieves nothing, if it's completely irrelevant, that's not a melacha at all. There is another possibility here, that what Rav is worrying about when he says that future generations will laugh at me is I'm achieving nothing in this. And what I'm doing is completely irrelevant. Nothing whatsoever is achieved by the discoloration of the neck, and therefore this wouldn't be a melacha at all. This would be not mekalkel, but the equivalent halachic principle of mekalkel, which is that a melacha has to achieve something, and here it's achieving nothing, and therefore it wouldn't be enough to make mechayev. So this is another suggestion in the melacha, in exemption, why Rav thought that what he was saying would be completely ruled out, because it achieves nothing whatsoever in the melacha, and therefore it's an irrelevant act and not a melacha at all. So say some Nachronim based upon the principle of the Chazon Ish. Another answer given, which is also from the Nishmas Odom, from the Chai Odom, is maybe the reason why Rav thought one would be exempt is because it's what's called ein derech severe bekach. We met this halachic principle before in I think Ein Daled on the base, where we with various melachos said ein derech a particular melacha bekach. So it's not the way of doing the melacha, which means to say there are things which are completely incidental and almost side consequences, even when they're inevitable, that are completely detached and removed from the action I'm doing, and a sort of extreme form of shinoi, and therefore enough to exempt you from the melacha. The poskim discussed this concept about someone who is eating berries or strawberries or an ice lolly or the sort, and it's quite common that one's skin becomes discolored through so doing, and one effectively dyes one's skin. And they discuss whether one would be whether this is in the realm of melach, and do we need to come on to halachic principles of mekalkel or davar she'ein miskavein or melachas she'ein tzrich l'gufa, etc. And they use this language of ein derech tzvia bekach. This is not derech tzvia. And as I'm eating and I'm doing something completely else, and the tzvia happens in such a side manner that it's an extreme shinur of sorts, and therefore I'd be exempt. So it's possible that this is what Rav is saying. I'm doing Shechita. I'm like eating strawberries.
Isn't that
an animal gets discolored? Ein derech tzvia bekach, and therefore Rav had to be mechadesh that no, I want the discoloration to occur.
Isn't that what Rashi is saying? Davar tema marti lehaskir tzvia b'shchita. Saying, I'm mentioning, isn't that the ridiculous thing? People will think it's ridiculous to even talk about tzvia when I'm doing shchita, and that's what Rashi.
The only clue I had in Shittas Rashi in this whole sugya is the second line in Rashi, in which Rashi says, later on, the Gemara explains where's his kavana to do tziviyah. So where does Rashi get from? Where does the Gemara later ask and explain where the kavana is for tziviyah? The answer is evidently what Rav explains. So Rashi seems to interpret that Rav's problem is there's a lack of kavana. Now, as I said, if what that means is the lack of kavanah in the sense of davar she'ein miskavein, I don't know why Rav was so embarrassed about it. Maybe he passed because davar she'ein miskavein is chayiv. So that's the only clue I have in Shittas Rashi. Rashi seems to be saying davar she'ein miskavein is what's going on over here.
I mean, is there a clue? Because Rashi changes the loshon of the Gemara because he said Soveya Basar b'may nichalei.
Just look at Rashi.
Divrei Motcha.
Bossa.
He adds bossa, in other words, a bit like what Paul's saying. The bossa's strange. Well, I can imagine it with begodim, but with bossa, it seems very unusual.
That's very interesting. And maybe Rashi means bossa as opposed to that it's the bossa, not the skin.
And that's why it seems a ridiculous thing that I'm saying. That by definition, blood. You're doing shchita. There's going to be blood on the meat.
I don't know. I mean, to me, the stronger loshon is Rashi saying my mechavin. Rashi seems to say the issue is one of kavanah. I don't know. I hear the diuk. I hear your point, Paul. I hear Adam, your diuk. Nonetheless, the only thing that seems to be mefurish in Rashi is Rashi tells us explicitly what Rav's question is. The kavan mefarish l'may chavin. Later on, it'll explain where the kavanah is. So that seems to me the strongest language in in Shiftas Rashi.
Can I ask if we are saying it's in derech bekach, would the fact that it's nichale actually cause you a problem again? Like we've seen before, like in the way you throw a clod of earth at the thing, and that's in derech disha bekach and all this kind of stuff. I presume that there was some kind of nicha there anyway, and still we say in derech.
Excellent. So there, a very good point. There in Ein Gimel on the base, where the Gemara says ein derech bekach, is because that's not the way people normally knock dates off a tree. Whereas here, this is the way butchers normally demonstrate the freshness of the meat. And that's the answer of Rav. This is a perfectly normal thing to do because this is how people do it. And therefore it becomes the derech.
So okay, it becomes the derech.
Yeah.
So nicha would, it doesn't mean nicha in the sense that you benefit necessarily.
Correct. It's a benefit that is so frequent that it becomes the derech.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just want to finish off with one last thing before we draw this our brief exploration of the sugya to a close, which I probably should have discussed right at the beginning of the sugya, which is if we go back to Netilas Neshama, what is the melachot tzricha legufa with Netilas Neshama? So very briefly, just in a couple of minutes available, it would appear that the essence of the melacha is the, and I mentioned this last year, is the manufacturing of the animal into meat. In other words, I'm processing the animal into meat, and that's the essence of the melacha, in which case the Netilas Neshama is from the perspective of the animal. The animal is losing its neshama and being converted into meat. Scenario number 2 of Netilas Neshama is when an animal partially loses its life. And this is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, really based on the Gemara, that hakozas dam, bloodletting, l'refuah, is chayiv because of Netilas Neshama. Even though you don't need the blood, you're not interested in doing a melacha in the blood, nonetheless, you're weakening the person from whom blood is being taken, and therefore that's a Netilas Neshama. You're extracting part of the life force of the person, and that would be a second example of Netilas Neshama of the melachot tzricha legufa. A third example of Netilas Neshama is what we saw in Tosfos at the bottom of Ein Hey Amud Aleph in the previous sugya Tosfos Masechet Shabbat, in which Tosfos says that there's a Netilas Neshama from the perspective of the dam, because the blood was part of a living creature. It was part of the living organic creature, which is the animal or the human or whatever it is. And when I extract the blood, I'm detaching the blood from its life. And now it becomes an inanimate liquid. It's lost its chiyus. And therefore, Tosfos tells us that there's a third category of melachot tzricha legufa in the melachot Netilas Neshama, which is looking at it from the perspective of the blood. So whenever one looks at Netilas Neshama, one has to ask oneself, is it from the perspective of the animal, which is losing its life or its blood, or is it from the perspective of the limb, which is being amputated, or the blood, which is being extracted, in which they're losing their connection to life? And that ties the sugya back to the Tosfos that we saw in the previous Gemara. So I'll stop there. We've only gone a little bit over time. That's a little bit of a whirlwind tour through our sugya. I haven't shown really a lot of what we've spoken about from inside in the sources, but I gave out quite extensive source sheets. And if you have time over the break to have a look at the lengthy pieces of Mishnah Berurah and Biur Halacha that I printed, and also the Minchas Chinuch that I printed, I think you'll find a lot of ideas that we discussed will be found there. And in the meantime, I wish everyone both a meaningful continuation of the 9 days and Tisha B'Av, and a good summer and a restful summer, and looking forward to restarting at a date to be as yet confirmed. Adam and I will speak off group, I think, and just finalise a date that seems to work for most people, if that's okay, Adam.
Sure, Rabbi Zobin, thank you so much for a very good year on everybody's behalf.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lovely to have everyone with us.
Thank you. Very, very lovely to have. And I hope, Adam, again, we need to speak, but hopefully we'll be looking at restarting possibly, depending what advice.
Yeah, I think we should